The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Duffy, chairman of our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, I think it appropriate on Constitution Day that we celebrate the idea that man could be free, the idea that man could govern itself, that Americans could make decisions for themselves. They didn't need the elite to govern them. They didn't need the elite to make decisions for them. Sadly, I think that we're having that debate again 200 and some odd years later because there's some across the aisle and they don't want to say it. I know they were called out by Mr. Gruber, who basically said, Americans are stupid. They're dumb. And there's a belief that Americans are too stupid to make decisions for themselves. I don't believe that to be the case. I think if we have disclosure, if we have good information, Americans make the best choice for them and their family. And bureaucrats at the CFPB don't know what's best for them. And so it brings me to the idea of the administrative state versus elected representatives. Who's more accountable? So there was a really bad health care law that was passed. I'm hearing stories about monthly costs going up from $800 to $1,300, $1,400 a month. To all of my friends across the aisle who voted for that, what happened to many of them? Anyone to the panel? What happened? They got voted out. They lost their elections. Many of them are no longer here because America said, that's a bad law. That doesn't work for my family. And they held them to account because it wasn't special interests who on that day carried the Obamacare legislation. The real accountability came when they had to go back home and face their constituents who said, I'm going to vote you out. And so now they're no longer here. But I want to talk about the CFPB a little bit because I think there's this perception that special interest has no impact on the CFPB because they're an agency that isn't funded through Congress, right? They're unaccountable. They can do whatever they want with their single director. So there was a recent study that came out, and it says the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau released a study indicating that arbitration agreements restrict consumers' relief for disputes with financial service providers by limiting class actions. Now, does anyone on the panel have an idea on how this study might impact the special interest? Anybody? Mr. Gray, Ambassador, enlighten me.
Microphone, please.
The first thing that comes to mind is the plaintiff's bar, which...
I agree! The plaintiff's bar. Does anyone disagree with that? Mr. Gupta, yes.
I do disagree with that. I mean, there's...
Okay.
This is the
credibility.
CFPB's study on arbitration is the most rigorous empirical study on the prevalence of arbitration in consumer contracts. You asked them...
I know your objection. Let me ask you a question, though. Do you think that the trial bar tried to communicate and impact the CFPB in regard to their decision with regard to class action lawsuits and arbitration?
Well, obviously.
No, answer my question.
Obviously, everyone weighed in on the study.
Of course they did. And you're telling me special interests don't have an impact on the CFPB?
Well, it's an empirical study, and it's really hard to argue with the conclusion of the study, which is that class action bans ban class action.
As Democrats in the Senate and the House lost their jobs when they were held accountable to the American people, who at the CFPB can be held account for bad decisions? Any of them up for election? None of them. And to argue that this is a better form of government, that you know what's best. That we have this debate today is incredibly frustrating. The QM rule, that I have small credit unions and banks, that a banker wants to lend to a family that they know, and they'll take the risk on. They're not going to send it into the market. But they've known the family and the dad and the mom and the brothers and sisters. They want to take a risk on this family. The CFPB says, oh, no, you can't. And if you do, there's additional liability if that loan goes bad, even though you have all the risk of the loan because it's on your books. Come on.
I mean, these are really arguments against consumer protection at all or administrative agencies.
No, and we might have a debate about the administrative agencies, but not about consumer protection. I believe in disclosure. I believe people should know the deal. They should know what they're getting into. But I also believe that if they know the deal, let them decide if it's right for them. With regard to payday lending, you know what? If the credit unions and the banks won't give me a loan, and you take away this source, where am I going to go? I'm going to go to Vinny down the street, or I'm doing really bad things that affect our society.
Well, payday loans are often not that different from Vinny down the street. I mean, we're talking about interest rates that exceed $1,000 and that trap people in a cycle of debt.
I'd love to have a better solution. I'm concerned that on the settlement side, that it's not just going to victims. It's going to third-party groups, Acorn-esque groups that you'll argue, oh, this is great for the American people, but you're going to drive money into third-party groups, not funded through Congress, not funded through the appropriations process. It's just like the DOJ settlements with banks. Doesn't go to the Treasury, doesn't go to victims, all of it. A great portion of it goes to left-wing community organization groups and not through the congressional appropriations process. And I know my time is done, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.